Tonight on NewsHour, Westminster is shaken after a dramatic 24 hours that saw Britain's ambassador to Washington dismissed amid scandal. Well, Sir Keir Starmer had backed Peter Mandelson, his hand-picked envoy to the United States, only to sack him yesterday after revelations emerged about his ties to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Appointed in December 2024 and in post since February, Mandelson had been cast as the man to open doors in Washington. Number 10 believed his unrivaled skills as a networker would help Britain forge close links with Donald Trump's incoming administration. His reputation earned him the nickname the Trump Whisperer, a diplomat who knew his way around the White House. But new disclosures of his friendship with Epstein, including sympathetic correspondence, well, that triggered an immediate backlash. Within hours of defending him, Downing Street reversed course. By last night, Mandelson was out of his post. And just to clarify for our viewers, Peter Mandelson remains Lord Mandelson. That title comes from his life peerage, which was granted in 2008 when Gordon Brown brought him back into the cabinet. A peerage is separate from any government or diplomatic role, and once appointed, it lasts for your life. Now, the House of Lords, where Mandelson still sits, is Britain's unelected second chamber. Its role is to scrutinise and revise laws, holding the government to account. Peers don't lose their titles if they're sacked from office. So despite yesterday's dismissal as ambassador, Mandelson continues to sit as a life peer in Parliament. Well, this is his latest chapter in a political career defined by both power and scandal. Twice forced from cabinet in the past, Mandelson once again finds himself on the losing end while serious questions are being asked of the Prime Minister's judgment. Let's take a look at how this story unfolded yesterday.
Britain's ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, was fired on Thursday for his long-term association with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. He was forced from the UK's most sought-after diplomatic post after his letters and emails to Epstein were published this week. One purported message described Epstein as, quote, "my best pal." Further emails were published in the media showing that Mandelson advised Epstein to fight for early release when he faced charges over soliciting a minor. Mandelson is a veteran politician considered key to Labour's success under former leader Tony Blair. His relationship with Epstein had become a further distraction in recent days for current British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, already under political pressure at home. The UK Foreign Ministry said in a statement that the information found in Mandelson's emails shows, quote, that the depth and extent of Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein is materially different from that known at the time of his appointment. It added that the revelation of Mandelson's suggestion that Epstein's first conviction was wrongful and should be challenged was new information. The release of the documents and others involving Epstein, who died by suicide in prison in 2019, has brought renewed attention to an issue that has implicated others, including US President Donald Trump and Britain's Prince Andrew. On Wednesday, Mandelson said he deeply regretted ever meeting Epstein and that he had carried on that association for far longer than he should have done. The statement seemed at the time to satisfy Starmer, who went on to give the former ambassador his backing in Parliament.
I have confidence in him, and he's playing an important role in the UK-US relationship.
Well, we caught a glimpse of Starmer there in Parliament, but let's just see the full back and forth between the PM and the British leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, A NATO country has just had to defend itself against Russian drones. Now, more than ever, we need our ambassador to Washington fully focused on this issue and liaising closely with America. Does the Prime Minister have full confidence in Peter Mandelson?
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying the victims of Epstein are the forefront of our minds. He was a despicable criminal who committed the most heinous crimes and destroy the lives of so many women and girls. The ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret for his association with him. He's right to do so. I have confidence in him, and he's playing an important role in the UK-US relationship.
This is interesting, Mr. Speaker. He says the ambassador has expressed full regret, but the victims of the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein have called for Lord Mandelson to be sacked. And just so the House is aware, in 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of child prostitution and sex trafficking that took place between 2002 and 2005. That is the precise period which Lord Mandelson called Jeffrey Epstein his best pal. Absolutely. Was the Prime Minister aware of this intimate relationship when he appointed Lord Mandelson to be our ambassador in Washington?
Mr. Speaker, as she and the House would expect, full due process was followed during this appointment, as it is with all ambassadors. The ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret. He is right to do so. He's now playing an important part in the US-UK relationship.
Let's cross to London now, where our correspondent Ollie Barrett will talk us through the extraordinary 48 hours that saw Sir Keir Starmer first defend, then dismiss his ambassador to Washington.
Well, Guy, frankly, it is a total mess for the administration of Keir Starmer. There are questions now about how all of this unfolded in the last 48 hours or so, coming from his own MPs, coming from privately his own cabinet ministers as well, because it was on Wednesday here at the House of Commons that Keir Starmer stood up and said he had full confidence in his ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson. By Thursday morning, that man was being fired by Keir Starmer. And so many in government, many in the Labour Party are saying, well, why did we so strongly back a man that it seemed inevitable was going to have to lose his job because of some of the revelations that were coming out, some of the further detail about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after the period in which he had received his first conviction. Now, the government says it's because some of that detail that's been revealed in emails, for example, between Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson was materially different, is how they describe it, compared to what they had known before. Well, that's been called into question by many who say it was well known that Peter Mandelson had had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein that went beyond the point at which he received his first conviction. So there is that question about the judgment exercised by Keir Starmer at the point of removing his US ambassador from his job, but also going back to the point at which he appointed him in the first place. That to say nothing of the difficulties that it now causes for the looming state visit for Donald Trump, the second state visit, unprecedented second state visit that he'll make to this country next week. Peter Mandelson was intricately involved in the detail and the planning of that trip. Some of the deals that we expect to be announced on that trip, for example, around technology and security. So that makes it difficult too. And then you have the fact that this just potentially overshadows a state visit that Donald Trump is making to this country on a topic that he doesn't like to talk about himself. There have been some whispers even in Washington that perhaps the visit might have to be canned entirely. At this point, it very much remains on. But if we do see Donald Trump and Keir Starmer holding a joint press conference together at some point during the state visit next week, will they be asked about Jeffrey Epstein? Will Donald Trump appreciate that? Will it overshadow or derail the state visit in some way, a state visit that's so key for the Keir Starmer administration? And going back to Labour MPs and what they feel about the leadership of their party at the moment, they just worry that this is the latest example of a lack of political antennae from Keir Starmer and those around him. The latest example, many Labour MPs feel, of them not being able to spot a story coming that many other people felt was obvious to predict and should have been responded to much more quickly. So very difficult days again for Keir Starmer in a week in which he tried to relaunch his government, so-called phase 2, the delivery phase of his administration after a difficult first year. This is not, Guy, how it was supposed to go.
Well, joining me now to dive deeper into this scandal is the former mayor of Middlesbrough and now political commentator Andy Preston, who joins us from North Allerton. Andy, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've all seen these messages. I guess it could be argued that Mandelson didn't know the full scale of Epstein's criminality when some of the notes were sent. So for fairness, let's just focus on those written after Epstein was charged with 4 counts of sexual activity with children. I've got some of them here, and they're pretty stark. This one says, remember, this was after he was faced with those charges. It says, "I'm here whenever you need. You need to fight back. Strategy, strategy, strategy." And then on the very day that Epstein went to prison, he says, "I think the world of you. I am furious about what's happened. Your friends stay with you and love you." Now, Andy, you've worked in politics, you've worked in business. This sort of behaviour where the pursuit of personal aggrandizement or commercial gain, where it clouds judgment in such an extreme and complete way, how widespread is that?
Hello, Guy. It is, look, it's a human instinct to try and do well, to make profit and make money, to look after yourself and your family. That's a natural instinct. But in public life, that's got to be reined in so strictly. And there are all kinds of rules, of course. But at the end of the day, even when you're within the rules, you have to exercise extreme caution. Peter Mandelson is someone who has rarely exercised caution. Peter Mandelson has an incredibly dreadful track record of self-enrichment, of getting to know, getting close to the wrong kinds of people, oligarchs, billionaires using private jets and their amazing yachts, and he has enriched himself. I'm not saying he's ever clearly broken the law, but he's broken the way that which the public expect him to behave. He resigned, was close to being sacked twice, and then managed to come back. He had a dreadful track record. So that's why the appointment of him was utterly bizarre. At the time he was being considered, Guy, many people on the left of centre and a lot of people even within the Labour Party were saying, do not do this. He is the wrong man at the wrong time for this job. But the Prime Minister put his personal stamp on this. He personally hired Peter Mandelson. Obviously, it's blown up. We can't actually overstate how big a crisis this is for the Prime Minister. Not for Peter Mandelson, but for our Prime Minister.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people, as you say, on all sides of the party now left saying to the Prime Minister, "I told you so." I mean, let's just look at Keir Starmer now. How rare is it to see a Prime Minister defend an ambassador at breakfast and then sack him at supper?
It's very rare. I'm struggling to think of a case, even with a minister, to have a turnaround that is a full 180-degree turn so rapidly with ministers. I'm not sure I've seen it before. I mean, Starmer's had dreadful trouble, since day one. He's been in power for 14 months. He wasn't popular when he started with the general public. But since then, he's had to fire Louise Haigh, his transport minister. It emerged that she had been convicted of fraud in the past. His anti-corruption minister, Tulip Siddiq, has resigned over family corruption issues. Andrew Gwynn was sacked or resigned over offensive WhatsApp messages. Roshanara Ali, who was involved with homelessness for the government, actually was found to have kicked out some tenants of a flat she owned and rented out, trying to get higher rents just before new laws came in. And then we had the Angela Rayner crisis last week, where she avoided or underpaid £40,000 worth of tax, when actually tax avoidance has been the main thrust of her political career for the last 10 years. This is staggering, Guy, because these are all personal appointments by Keir Starmer. He seems to get everything wrong. His head of staff in number 10 initially was Sue Gray. He had to sack her very quickly. The man is a walking catastrophe. He makes error after error, and this one, I think, within 6 or so months will bring Keir Starmer down.
Well, they say there's bold prediction there. This could be the end of Keir Starmer. Let's just talk about whether it's the end of Peter Mandelson. I mean, his career has had a certain sense of what football fans might call bounce back ability. You know, he's had at times brilliance, but then ruined with scandal. Does this feel like the final act for Mr. Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, do you think?
It has to be the final act. I cannot see anyway. Peter Mandelson is undoubtedly a charismatic and charming man, and that's how he's got where he is. He is a charmer. He ingratiates himself with the rich, the famous, and the powerful. And he's done that for decades now, and he's done very well out of it. It always ends in trouble, always. He always bounces back. Of course, that's due to his charm. But this scandal is about sex. It's about underage minors being trafficked for prostitution, and it's about Peter Mandelson defending, supporting a known trafficker of underage people for sex. There is no comeback from this guy. He cannot be stripped of his peerage. I believe he will always be known as Lord Mandelson, but they can expel him from the House of Lords. And I don't believe that the media will be interested in any interviews. I can't see that his business career can go anywhere at all after this.
Yeah, it's certainly hard to imagine how anything could get more serious. He was billed, wasn't he, as the Trump whisperer only relatively recently. Has that label now become a bit of a liability for Britain, do you think?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, all this started, of course, so Mandelson was appointed and Keir Starmer went over to the White House in a really embarrassing, humiliating for the nation, grovelling way, pulled out a letter out of his pocket and handed it over in a very sort of showy way and said, "Oh, we'd like you to come to Britain, Mr. President, for an unprecedented second state visit." Donald Trump, of course, loves the idea of that, the pageantry, the meeting royals, the golden carriage. And it embarrassed us then, it humiliated us then. But what's happened is Trump is already embroiled in the Epstein story. He's losing support in the US with his core base within MAGA for that. Now he's coming here exactly at the wrong time, just when the story is breaking here and infecting our government, because this is a government issue. So I think this is just the worst situation possible for Keir Starmer. It's the worst situation possible for Donald Trump. Peter Mandelson, we don't need to worry about. He's gone. But I understand that Peter Mandelson being very close with another appointee of Keir Starmer, which is Morgan McSweeney. And Morgan McSweeney and Mandelson are very close. I think that Morgan McSweeney will be sacked or be asked to resign, I would imagine within a couple of weeks. But I don't think the heat is going to be turned off. I think Starmer's going to come under more and more pressure as they struggle in the polls and they'll look for another leader. I think within 6 months.
Wow, and it's very interesting what you said there about President Trump, of course. The Epstein scandal is one of the very few things that seems to have actually hurt him in terms of his popularity with his base. How will this scandal play out within the corridors of power in Washington, do you think?
I think that what's interesting about this scandal is that it's not going away. The release of information is very slow, and obviously there's a campaign for more information to be released. Trump is holding off doing that, but the pressure just keeps going up and up and up every week. I don't think this story is going away. Will it mortally wound Trump? I don't know, but it's certainly weakened him. I don't feel qualified to comment too much on exactly what will happen in the corridors of power in the White House, but it's damaging everyone. I just think that Keir Starmer is now in so much trouble. I don't see how he recovers from this over the coming months.
And of course, we don't know exactly who knew what. I mean, Downing Street certainly knew something of Lord Mandelson's past embarrassments. Was this a blind gamble by Starmer, or some sort of skills deficiency, or just sheer arrogance?
Well, I think there are a number of theories around, Guy. One of them is that Keir Starmer is not hugely popular with his own party, and Mandelson is still very much influential at the upper tiers of the Labour Party, the old guard, those who've been around a long time. They have a lot of influence still. And some people think that perhaps it was Starmer's attempt to ingratiate himself with Peter Mandelson and thereby ingratiate himself with the older power brokers in the Labour movement. There's another theory which is perhaps more controversial, in that Starmer knew pretty much everything about Peter Mandelson and Epstein, which I think is a totally reasonable position, but that because Trump is embroiled in the scandal, that perhaps Mandelson and Trump already know each other well via Epstein. So because of that Epstein link between the two men, Mandelson would be well placed to work with Trump on Britain's behalf.
And it's interesting that how young people, people who are cynical, disenfranchised from politics in the UK might look at this. I mean, Labour came in to some degree promising an end to this sort of Westminster cronyism. And yet this really seems to kind of be a almost perfect example of it. I mean, how do we move forward? How do we convince voters that actually reasonable, diligent, sensible judgment is going on? Of course, the world won't work if we have to morally vet every single person we shake hands with. There has to be a sense of realism about that. But this is such an extreme lack of judgment that I guess UK voters must be left wondering whether any changes occurred at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no changes occurred, Guy. I mean, I think Labour were elected with a large majority, but a very small number of votes, about 33%, which is low for a working majority. So they weren't particularly popular, but they got in because people were sick of the Tories. After 14 years and several crises, people wanted shot of the Tories, and Labour were deemed to be the best bet. They pledged openness, transparency. They pledged a different way of doing things that was mature and to stop the scandals. But what took the Tories 14 years to happen with scandal after scandal, Labour have done in literally 14 months. It is unprecedented in British politics to have such a series of crises so quickly. And about getting people back on side, that's going to be incredibly tough. There's a global phenomenon going on where people are cynical, skeptical, conspiracy theories are running riot across the world. And that's helping, of course, now the smaller parties, the people who haven't been in power and aren't tainted with the same brush. So in the UK, of course, that means, in particular, reform. Reform will do very well out of this. The Tories, Kemi Badenoch put in a really good performance, but of course, Kemi and the Tories are still tainted by the 14 years of power they had that only ended 14 months ago. So it will take time to wash that out. So reform will be the big beneficiary of the cynicism that young and old people have about politics.
And of course, you know, ambassadors speak for the country that they represent. You know, do you think the ethical bar needs to be higher? Do you think there needs to be something brought in, some kind of additional vetting process, just to add a bit of scrutiny to this, and perhaps just demonstrate to the public that things are going to change for the better?
I think that when you're appointing an ambassador, what you need to do is appoint someone who is very experienced, quite charming, sociable, polite, but above all, very grounded and predictable. You almost want someone who's slightly boring, and forgive me for saying that, I hope I haven't offended any diplomats, but someone who is slightly dull and predictable, like a head boy kind of person. Mandelson is categorically not that person. Wherever he goes, there is a scandal. Wherever he goes, he seems to manage to enrich himself. And so it was a bizarre appointment from the very, very start. And I think that what we need to do is have ambassadors who are, as I say, steady, reliable, experienced, intelligent, but above all, very predictable. And this veering away from that, perhaps it was done, you know, because Trump is a forceful character. Perhaps it was thought that somebody more typical in that field would be eaten alive by Trump in the White House, and they needed a stronger character. I don't know, perhaps we're crediting them with too much intelligence. But either way, it's backfired spectacularly. And the one who'll pay the biggest price will not be Peter Mandelson, it will be Keir Starmer.
And finally, Andy, you've already said that you don't think there's a realistic hope for Keir Starmer to be able to claw back the narrative after this. If he were to do so, what would he need to do
I think the main thing he needs to do is, or he needs to hope for, is for the economy to improve rapidly and significantly, because that will give him the financial power to avoid painful tax cuts, painful cuts to services, but also money as a government to do things that the public like. At the moment, we are in a financial straitjacket. There is no room to do anything, and there are cuts to government coming before long, and certainly tax rises before then. So it's a really extraordinarily difficult position that he's in. He's got to pray for economic growth that brings in tax revenues and allows him to buy favour with the public. That's all he's got to go on. He's not a popular man. His party are turning on him. The economy is flatlining, not growing. Our debt is growing. It's an almost impossible situation, Guy.
Andy, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis. We appreciate it very much, as always. Thank you. So yesterday's events resulted in a political shockwave. Peter Mandelson, once trusted to speak for Britain in Washington, was removed in a single day. The speed of the reversal has left Westminster asking searching questions about judgment, loyalty and standards. For Sir Keir Starmer, it's a test of credibility he cannot afford to fail. Well, that is all for this edition of News Hour from all of us here at A News. Thanks for being with us.